Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back through the mists of time, not to the usual clamor of chariots or the grand pronouncements from a sun-drenched throne, but to a much quieter, far more enigmatic corner of ancient Egypt. Picture this: a hidden chamber, deep beneath the sands, where the air is still and silent, save for the imagined impossibly slow breath of a king who isn't dead, but merely sleeping. We're about to explore the mysterious legend of the Sleeping Pharaoh, a tale whispered down through millennia, a story of a ruler caught in an eternal slumber. Now, delving into these kinds of forgotten legends, especially ones involving potentially cursed or supernaturally slumbering royalty, you probably won't survive this deep dive into ancient mysteries without at least questioning your own bedtime routine and perhaps checking under your bed for any millennia-old monarchs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. So drop a comment below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our journey doesn't take us to the well-trodden paths of pharaohs whose tombs have yielded dazzling treasures and whose histories are inscribed on towering temple walls. Instead, you find yourself sifting through the quieter, dustier archives of folklore, through fragmented texts that hint at a different kind of immortality, a different kind of ruler. This is the legend of a pharaoh who, unlike his many brethren, did not fully embrace the complex journey to the field of reeds, the Osirian afterlife. Instead, he sleeps, an enchanted, unending slumber, deep within the earth, his body perfectly preserved, not by the elaborate arts of the embalmer alone, but by something more profound, more mysterious. This isn't your average overslept the alarm by a few centuries situation. We're talking a level of commitment to napping that would make a hibernating bear look like a caffeine addict with a deadline. The whispers of this sleeping pharaoh are ancient, passed down through generations of storytellers, hinted at in obscure papyri, perhaps even embedded in the local folklore of certain remote oases or forgotten desert valleys. The historical sources for this specific legend are a bit like trying to read faded hieroglyphs by the light of a very, very sleepy firefly, faint, flickering, and wonderfully open to a lot of imaginative interpretation. It's a story that exists on the fringes of accepted Egyptology, a tantalizing what-if that captures the imagination. Now, it's crucial to understand how this concept of a sleeping pharaoh differs from the mainstream ancient Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife. As a mainstream historical fact, the ancient Egyptians possessed incredibly elaborate and sophisticated ideas about what happened after death. They believed in mummification to preserve the physical body, the Khat, so that the deceased's Ka life force or spiritual double and Ba soul or personality, often depicted as a human-headed bird, could recognize it and unite with it for the journey into the Duat, the underworld. This journey was fraught with trials and judgments, culminating in the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at truth and order. If successful, the deceased could achieve a form of resurrection and live eternally in the afterlife with Osiris, the god of the dead. Most pharaohs, therefore, went to extraordinary lengths to be very, very thoroughly dead, then elaborately prepared to become very, very thoroughly undead for their cosmic field trip. Our sleeping pharaoh, however, if the legend holds true, chose or was fated to a different path. He didn't journey on, he simply paused. The legend doesn't usually speak of canopic jars or the Book of the Dead being central to his eternal rest. Instead, it hints at a profound enchantment, a divine decree, or perhaps a self-imposed state of suspended animation. His life force held in delicate stasis. Waiting. Waiting for what? You ask, that's part of the enduring mystery we'll gently uncover. Was it a curse that lulled him into this timeless sleep? Was it a sacred duty? A promise to awaken at a time of great need? Or did he discover some forgotten magic? Some secret of the gods that allowed him to step outside the river of time itself? The allure of such a mystery is undeniable. The idea of a powerful ruler, not gone forever but merely slumbering, a hidden king holding secrets of a bygone age, resonates deeply. It taps into that human fascination with lost worlds, with the idea of time travel, with the hope that some great figures of the past might not be entirely lost to us. It's the ultimate do not disturb sign on a civilizational scale. The ancient Egyptians themselves had a complex relationship with sleep and dreams, which adds another layer of intrigue. A quirky tidbit is that some genuine Egyptian magical spells, inscribed on papyri or amulets, were indeed designed to protect the sleeper from bad dreams, ward off malevolent spirits that might attack during the vulnerable state of sleep, or even to induce prophetic or divinely inspired dreams. They understood sleep not just as a physical necessity, but as a liminal state, a bridge to other realms of consciousness or divine influence. So, the idea of a pharaoh in a supernaturally deep, protected sleep might not have seemed entirely outlandish to the ancient mind. Steeped in magic and mystery, folklorists and Egyptologists, when they allow themselves to ponder such enchanting, if historically elusive legends, still debate their origins. They discuss whether such persistent sleeping hero or king under the mountain type narratives, if they ever became attached to specific, perhaps now forgotten, pharaonic names in later Egyptian folklore, might draw from highly distorted historical memories of unusual burial practices, symbolic interpretations of certain religious texts, or if they are purely the product of imaginative storytelling traditions, reflecting a universal human wish for continuity and the return of a golden age. For tonight, however, you don't need to worry about the academic debates or the precise historical veracity. You are here to drift, to imagine, to let the gentle whispers of this ancient legend lull you. The sleeping pharaoh awaits, in his silent, hidden chamber, a mystery wrapped in the linen of ages, a king caught between worlds, his story a soft, sandy path leading us into the quiet landscapes of sleep. The exact identity of this pharaoh, the era of his reign, the reasons for his slumber, these are details that will unfurl slowly, like an ancient papyrus scroll, as our journey together continues into the heart of this enigmatic tale. So, this sleeping pharaoh, this enigmatic ruler whose legend we began to gently unspool in our last section, wasn't just a figment of pure fancy, floating untethered in the mythical ether like a forgotten dream. No, the whispers, those faint, persistent echoes from the ancient past, always place him, and his extraordinary slumber, within a particular, if somewhat hazy, period of Egyptian history. Let's call him Pharaoh Amenemnasut, a name that, like the legend itself, seems to drift in and out of the more well-documented king lists. His reign, as the stories tell it, belonged to an era that glittered brightly on the surface, a gilded age of apparent peace and prosperity, but one that carried deep, quiet shadows beneath its golden veneer. You find yourself observing Egypt during what seems, at first glance, to be a time of considerable flourishing. The Nile, that lifeblood of the nation, flows predictably, its annual inundation bringing forth the rich, dark silt that ensures bountiful harvest. Storehouses along the riverbanks are filled with grain, a testament to the land's fertility and the efficient administration of the kingdom. Trade routes, both overland by caravan and along the great river itself, are bustling with activity. Exotic goods from Nubia to the south, gold, ebony, incense, perhaps even the occasional bewildered giraffe destined for a royal menagerie, make their way into the markets of Thebes or Memphis. Ships sail to Punt for fragrant resins and myrrh, and to the Levant for cedarwood and fine oils. This was a time when Egypt was doing pretty well for itself. The Nile was, well, niling quite productively. The pyramids were mostly already built by this later point we're imagining, but still looking impressively pointy on the horizon. And the average high priest of Amun probably enjoyed a very decent divine benefits package. Complete with prime temple real estate, artisans are busy in their workshops, crafting exquisite jewelry from lapis lazuli and carnelian, carving delicate statues from alabaster, and painting vibrant scenes on tomb walls for those wealthy enough to afford a well-appointed afterlife, which was, pretty much everyone who was anyone. Great temples are still being maintained, their massive columns reaching towards the brilliant blue sky, their sanctuaries filled with the scent of incense and the murmur of priestly chants. Pharaoh Amenemnasut himself, at least in the early years of his reign, is seen as a bringer of stability, a patron of the arts, a ruler under whose watch the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt seem to be in harmonious balance. It's a comfortable, well-ordered world on the surface. But if you listen closely, beyond the cheerful hammering of the coppersmiths and the songs of the field workers, you might hear those subtle undercurrents, the shadows that give this gilded age its peculiar, slightly unsettling quality. Like any good historical drama, or indeed, any period of apparent calm, just when things look most serene. You know there's probably a nervous vizier in a palace back room, frantically trying to balance the royal budget, or a rival noble practicing his "I'm completely loyal, honestly" smile with a little too much intensity. Perhaps there are whispers of discontent among certain powerful priestly factions, who feel the pharaoh is not paying them quite enough deference, or perhaps too much to a rival god. Maybe there are hushed rumors of minor incursions by restless tribes on the desert frontiers, easily dealt with for now, but a reminder that Egypt is not an island, entire of itself. Within Pharaoh Amenemnesut's court itself, which you can picture as a place of elaborate ritual, sun-drenched colonnades, and the rustle of fine linen robes, there might be a certain unspoken tension beneath the polished etiquette. Nobles vie for favor. Officials navigate complex bureaucratic channels, and perhaps there's a growing interest in more esoteric or mystical religious practices, a turning inwards as if seeking answers or assurances that the outward prosperity doesn't quite provide. Court life was likely a delightful, if somewhat stressful, mix of all praise be to the living Horus, Pharaoh Amenemnasut, giver of all good things and possessor of an excellent new pectoral. And, psst, did you hear what Lady Neferhotep whispered to the chief scribe about the vizier's rather unfortunate new wig? Simply scandalous. Oh, do pass the honeyed figs, won't you? A mainstream historical fact that provides a good parallel for such a prosperous yet shadowed time is the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, roughly from 2055 to 1650 BCE. This period is often considered a classical age, renowned for its magnificent art, its profound literature like the Tale of Sinuhe, and its strong, centralized administration. However, it also experienced its share of internal power struggles, border conflicts, and periods where the pharaoh's authority was challenged, giving it that complex blend of brilliance and underlying fragility that seems to fit the legendary era of our Sleeping Pharaoh. Adding to the unique atmosphere of Amenemnasut's time, a quirky tidbit from Egyptian history is the significant role that dream interpretation played in certain periods. Skilled interpreters of dreams, some of whom were attached to major temples or even the royal court itself, would meticulously analyze visions and nightmares, seeking divine messages, omens about the future, or guidance for important decisions. Given the eventual fate of our pharaoh, this societal interest in the mysterious landscape of sleep and dreams might be a subtle foreshadowing, a cultural preoccupation that resonates with his legendary slumber. Egyptologists and historians, when they examine periods of apparent stability and great monumental construction in Egypt's long history, often continue to debate the precise balance of power that existed between the pharaoh, who was theoretically an absolute god-king, and the increasingly influential and wealthy priestly colleges, particularly that of Amun-Ra at Thebes during the New Kingdom, or other powerful factions within the state. They question how much true, unassailable authority the ruler consistently wielded versus the subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, influence of entrenched temple hierarchies, powerful noble families, and long-established traditions. So, you find yourself in this Egypt of Pharaoh Amenemnasut, a land of outward splendor, a culture rich in tradition and artistic achievement, but with faint, unsettling tremors beneath the surface. The sun still shines brightly on the majestic Nile. The harvests are still mostly plentiful, and the rituals of daily life and divine worship continue with their accustomed pomp. Yet, there's a feeling that this gilded age might be holding its breath, poised on the edge of something unknown, something that will eventually lead its enigmatic ruler down a path not to the glorious, active afterlife of Osiris, but into an endless, silent, and profoundly mysterious sleep. This prosperous, yet subtly shadowed, kingdom is the stage upon which his unique and sleepy destiny will unfold. So, we've established that the Egypt of our legendary pharaoh Amenemneset was a land of glittering surfaces and quiet, underlying shadows. A gilded cage, perhaps, as we explored in the last section, with its prosperous facade and those faint, unsettling tremors beneath. But what of the man himself? This pharaoh Amenemnesut, the ruler whose destiny was not the usual grand procession into the Assyrian afterlife, but rather a sleep that would outlast empires. What kind of king was he before he became the fabled Sleeping Pharaoh, the central figure of these hushed and ancient whispers? Well, if the fragments of the legend are to be pieced together, Amenemhotep wasn't your typical but bombastic warrior king, forever smiting enemies on temple pylons, nor was he one of those pharaohs solely obsessed with building the biggest, most pointy pyramid on the block. No. Amenemhotep, it seems like was cut from a different, quieter cloth. You might picture him as a more introspective soul, a scholarly ruler, perhaps with a touch of melancholy in his eyes. A man more often found in the hushed confines of the royal library, poring over ancient papyrus scrolls, than on the training grounds with his chariot divisions. He wasn't the let's conquer Nubia before breakfast type. He was more the let's all deeply ponder the existential ramifications of that rather peculiar dream I had last night about a sacred baboon attempting to teach a crocodile to play the sonnet board kind of pharaoh. The palace head librarian probably adored him and had excellent job security. The royal generals, on the other hand, might have found his priorities a little perplexing. The legends consistently whisper of his deep and abiding fascination with the mysteries of sleep itself, and particularly with dreams. It was said that Amenemhotep experienced incredibly vivid, often prophetic dreams, visions that he would meticulously record or have recorded by his most trusted scribes upon waking. He might have consulted with those specialized dream interpreters we mentioned earlier, those masters of deciphering divine messages from the nocturnal wanderings of the mind, far more frequently than was customary. Or perhaps, finding their standard interpretations a bit too by the book, he even began to develop his own, more profound theories about the nature of the dream world, seeing it not just as a collection of random images or simple omens, but as a genuine gateway, a liminal space between the world of the living and other unseen realities. If you had a particularly interesting or baffling dream in Amenemhotep's Egypt, he was definitely your go-to guy at court. Oh, high priest, you dreamt your ceremonial headdress turned into a flock of unusually chatty ibises. Fascinating that most likely signifies an impending surplus in the royal fig harvest, or possibly that you should lay off the extra strong temple incense before bedtime. We shall meditate upon it. He was the original dream journal enthusiast, but with considerably more gold leaf and a team of scribes on standby. This unique preoccupation would naturally have colored his style of governance and the atmosphere of his court. While the machinery of the Egyptian state, the collection of taxes, the administration of justice, the oversight of agricultural works would have continued under his viziers and officials, Amenemhotep himself might have seemed somewhat detached from the more mundane, day-to-day affairs. He would have fulfilled his essential ritual duties as pharaoh. Of course, maintaining Ma'at divine order and justice and honoring the gods, for that was the bedrock of kingship. But his true passion, the legends suggest, lay in those quieter, more esoteric pursuits. His court might have been less about ostentatious displays of wealth and power, and more about subdued scholarly discussions, debates on theological mysteries, or readings from ancient wisdom texts. The social events at Amenemhotep's palace were probably a real hoot. If your idea of a party involves a lengthy discourse on the symbolic migration patterns of the base soul through the 12 hours of the night, followed by a light snack of dates and a quiet contemplation session. And please, no spoilers for how Ra successfully navigates the perilous fifth hour of the Duat. Some of us haven't read that far in the Amduat scrolls yet. How his subjects, both the common folk and the powerful nobles, perceived this rather unconventional ruler is an interesting point. He was likely respected for his wisdom, his piety, and the continued peace and prosperity of the land under his reign. But his remoteness, his deep immersion in these otherworldly concerns, might also have created an aura of mystery, perhaps even a little unease be done around him. He wasn't a pharaoh who mingled easily with the crowds or led his armies with flamboyant heroism. He was an enigma, a king whose thoughts seemed to dwell as much in the land of dreams as in the land of the living. It's worth noting, as a mainstream historical fact, that some pharaohs in Egyptian history did indeed display deeply personal and sometimes radical spiritual or intellectual preoccupations that significantly shaped their reigns. The most famous example is Amenhotep IV, who renamed himself Akhenaten and instituted a revolutionary, near monotheistic worship of the sun disk, Aten, dramatically changing Egypt's religious landscape for a time. While our Amenemnasute's focus is on the mysteries of sleep and dreams rather than a solar deity, Akhenaten's story provides a precedent for a pharaoh whose unique spiritual convictions could lead them down unconventional paths, sometimes setting them apart from their predecessors and their people. A quirky tidbit that connects to Amenemneset's supposed interests is the existence of ancient Egyptian dream books. These were papyri containing long lists of common dream motifs and their prescribed interpretations, often quite formulaic. For example, dreaming of a white loaf might mean good news, while dreaming of a dark loaf could signify something less favorable. One can easily imagine Pharaoh Amenemnasut as an avid collector or even a critical scholar of such texts, perhaps finding them too simplistic and seeking to compile his own, more profound encyclopedia of the dream world. Egyptologists and historians of religion often discuss the extent to which a pharaoh's personal piety or esoteric interests, as distinct from their obligatory state religious duties, could genuinely shape state policy or even be openly expressed and pursued. Given the highly traditional, conservative, and ritualized nature of Egyptian kingship and its associated theology, was there space for a truly maverick, introspective dreamer on the throne of the two lands? Or would such preoccupations need to be carefully managed and veiled within the accepted forms of divine kingship? For Pharaoh Amenemnasut, these unique traits, his scholarly bent, his introspective nature, and above all, his profound and perhaps obsessive connection to the world of sleep and dreams, were not just personal quirks. According to the legend, they were integral to his destiny. They set him apart, made him different, and perhaps in ways he couldn't have foreseen, prepared him for the extraordinary timeless slumber that would eventually claim him, transforming him from a living, breathing, dreaming king into the eternal, enigmatic sleeping pharaoh. His very character, it seems, was the quiet prelude to the great mystery that would follow. So, our Pharaoh Amenemnasut, with his scholarly mind, his quiet, introspective ways, and his deep fascination for the elusive world of dreams. As we pondered in the last section, wasn't just idly collecting ancient REM cycle reports or jotting down his own nocturnal visions for mere intellectual amusement. His unique preoccupations, the ancient legends strongly suggest, were perhaps drawing him, or being drawn by him, towards a very specific and rather unsettling destiny. And like any good mysterious destiny, especially one from the land of sphinxes and hidden tombs, it often comes heralded by an equally mysterious, and usually rather unhelpfully vague, ancient prophecy, a whisper from the dawn of time foretelling an endless night. You have to imagine that this prophecy wasn't exactly headline news in the Daily Nile Bulletin. It wouldn't have been proclaimed from temple rooftops or inscribed on public monuments for all to see. No, this was likely a far more obscure piece of lore, perhaps found hidden deep within the archives of a forgotten temple library, inscribed on a crumbling papyrus roll that hadn't seen the light of Ra for centuries. Or maybe it was a cryptic utterance from a little-known oracle, a seer dwelling in some remote desert cave, whose words were recorded and then largely ignored, deemed too outlandish or too depressing for mainstream consumption. Ancient prophecies, yes, you'll find, were rarely models of clarity. It wouldn't be a straightforward memo like, "Attention Pharaoh Amenemnasut. Please be advised that on the third Tuesday of next month, you are scheduled to commence a really, really long nap. Kindly make all necessary arrangements." Oh no! It would be far more poetic and perplexing, something along the lines of, "When the sacred scarab beetle stumbles thrice under the eye of the unblinking moon, and the river of life whispers secrets to the silent sands. Then shall the shepherd of the two lands close his eyes upon the sun and enter the embrace of an endless night to await the dawning that is not a dawn. I got cryptic. Much, it's the kind of thing that makes royal advisors sigh deeply and wish they'd taken up pottery instead. How Pharaoh Amenemneset himself came to learn of this prophecy is, like much of his legend, shrouded in mystery. Perhaps during one of his long, solitary study sessions in the royal library, surrounded by towering stacks of papyrus scrolls, his hand fell upon that one ancient, dust-covered text. As he unrolled it carefully, his eyes already accustomed to deciphering the arcane symbols of forgotten rituals and dream interpretations, recognized the archaic script and the ominous weight of its words. Or maybe one of his trusted dream interpreters, after a particularly potent and disturbing vision experienced by the pharaoh, sought out older, more obscure prophetic texts to find a parallel, and stumbled upon this chilling prediction. His reaction upon encountering such a destiny foretold would surely have been profound. This wasn't a prophecy of glorious battles or a long and prosperous reign culminating in a magnificent tomb and a smooth journey to the afterlife. This was something else entirely, a sleep like unto death, an age of slumber, an endless night. You can imagine Amenemneset, the scholar, the dreamer, retreating even further into his contemplations. Did he feel a surge of trepidation, a cold fear of this unnatural, unending sleep? Or, given his unique fascination with the very nature of slumber and dreams, did he perhaps feel a strange sense of recognition, a pull towards a fate that resonated with the deepest, most hidden parts of his own enigmatic soul? Upon hearing he was destined for an endless night, Amenemneset probably didn't just exclaim, "Oh, splendid! Even more uninterrupted time for quality dreaming." It likely caused a good few sleepless nights of its own. Ironically enough, as he pondered the true meaning of his very, very sleepy future, if the prophecy became known, even in hushed whispers, within the inner circles of his court, it would have undoubtedly added to those subtle undercurrents of unease that already marked his reign. Some courtiers, the more pragmatic and worldly ones, might have dismissed it as archaic superstition, the ramblings of a long-dead madman. Others, particularly those priests or officials already attuned to the more mystical side of Egyptian belief, might have seen it as a genuine divine decree, a fate to be prepared for, however unsettling. You can just bet the palace gossip network was buzzing over time. Psst, did you hear what old High Priest Imhotep found in the really dusty scroll room? Says the big boss is going to, sleep forever. Pass the lotus wine. This royal administration just got a whole lot more interesting. Or perhaps a whole lot more permanently boring, depending on which department you work in. The prophecy itself, as reconstructed from the legendary fragments, likely hinted at more than just sleep. It might have spoken of a time when the pharaoh's slumber would be essential for some great cosmic balance, or that he would awaken, centuries or even millennia later, at a time of dire need for Egypt, a king under the mountain figure. Or perhaps it was more personal, a unique path to a different kind of eternity, one intertwined with the very fabric of dreams. The specifics are lost to the sands, but the core message remained a long, unnatural, and profoundly significant sleep awaited him. Now, prophecy and the consultation of oracles played a genuinely significant role in ancient Egyptian society. This is a well-established mainstream historical fact. From the grand state oracle of Amun at the Siwa Oasis, famously consulted by Alexander the Great, down to local village seers, Egyptians regularly sought divine guidance or predictions about the future for matters great and small. From affairs of state and military campaigns to personal decisions about marriage or business. So, the idea of a pharaoh taking a prophecy seriously, especially one concerning his own destiny, would have been entirely in keeping with the cultural mindset of the time. A quirky, though perhaps speculative, tidbit is to consider how such a prophecy might interact with existing Egyptian beliefs about the night and the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, for instance, contains numerous spells and hymns related to the deceased pharaoh successfully navigating the perilous journey through the Duat, the 12 hours of the night, to be reborn with the sun god Ra each morning. A legend of an endless night could be seen as a fascinating, almost heretical inversion of this. A journey into a night from which there was no prescribed daily awakening, only a vast, timeless slumber. Perhaps the prophecy even hinted at specific, forgotten rituals or preparations needed for such an unprecedented state. The interpretation of prophetic texts from the ancient world, including those from Egypt, is, of course, a deeply complex field for modern scholars. Historians often debate whether such prophecies were genuinely believed to be accurate predictions of future events. If they were sometimes post-eventum creations, that is, written after an event occurred, to make it seem as if it were foretold and thus divinely sanctioned, or if they served as a form of religio-political literature, subtly intended to influence contemporary audiences, bolster a ruler's legitimacy, or warn against certain courses of action. For Pharaoh Amenemnesit, however, this ancient prophecy, whether he fully understood it or not, whether he embraced it or feared it, would have cast a long, deep shadow over the remainder of his reign. It would have added another layer to his already enigmatic persona, setting him further apart, and perhaps guiding his thoughts and actions as he moved, knowingly or unknowingly, towards the day when the whispers of an endless night would finally become his own quiet, eternal reality. So, Pharaoh Amenemnesut, our rather introspective and dream-obsessed ruler, has been living under the long, cool shadow of that decidedly sleepy prophecy we just unearthed from the dusty archives of legend. The one foretelling an endless night? An age of slumber just for him. One imagines he didn't exactly circle a date on the royal papyrus calendar and set a water clock as a wake-up call for a few millennia hence. But prophecies, especially the ancient, deeply resonant kind, have a rather persistent tendency to unfold, or at least to coincide with some very peculiar and legend-making occurrences. And so, as the story whispers, the day, or perhaps the fated night, finally arrived for Amenemnesut. You have to picture the scene. This wasn't a dramatic deathbed surrounded by wailing mourners and frantic physicians. The legend doesn't speak of a final illness or a battle wound. Instead, the circumstances surrounding the moment sleep descended upon Pharaoh Amenemnesut are painted with an air of quiet ritual, profound mystery, and perhaps even a sense of willing acceptance. Perhaps it occurred in his most private chambers, those rooms filled with ancient scrolls and charts of constellations, or within a secluded temple sanctuary, deep within the precincts sacred to a god of hidden knowledge or dreams. Some versions of the tale even suggest he had prepared a special dreaming chamber, a place constructed according to esoteric principles, designed to be a gateway between worlds. The peculiar circumstances leading up to this momentous nap might have involved Amenemnesit himself undertaking specific ancient rituals, knowing the prophecy, and with his deep immersion in the lore of sleep and dreams, remember his personal dream journal? Probably bound in the finest gazelle skin. He might have spent days or even weeks in purification, fasting, and deep meditation. Perhaps he was attended only by a handful of his most trusted priests or initiates, those few who understood the prophecy's true import and were sworn to secrecy. This wasn't your standard ate too much at the royal banquet and just nodded off on the throne situation. This was more like performed a sacred 7-day ritual involving quiet chanting to a lapis lazuli scarab while anointing oneself with 7 rare unguents under the light of a specific celestial alignment. And now one is feeling a bit eternally drowsy, as foretold. Maybe there were subtle omens in the days leading up to it. An unnatural stillness in the air, a rare comet blazing silently in the night sky over the palace. Or perhaps all the sacred cats in the Temple of Bastet suddenly taking a synchronized, unusually long nap? The legend paints a picture not of sudden collapse, but of a gradual, almost deliberate yielding to an irresistible, otherworldly weariness. And then, the moment itself. You can imagine Amenemnesut, robed in simple, unadorned linen, perhaps lying upon a specially prepared couch or bed within his chosen sanctuary. His eyes, which had so often peered into the mysteries of ancient texts and the landscapes of dreams, would slowly close. His breathing, already shallow from days of ritual or deep contemplation, would become fainter and fainter until it was almost imperceptible, like the gentlest stir of desert air at dusk. There was no struggle, no final gasp, just a serene, profound descent into a sleep so deep it seemed to merge with the very fabric of eternity. The few attendants who might have witnessed this were probably a bit flummoxed. Right. So, is he just taking a particularly deep nap after all that chanting? Or is this the actual endless night the ancient, scary papyrus mentioned? Should we try to offer him a small rice cake? Probably not. Best just to make sure his favorite symbolic dream scepter is comfortably by his side and nobody disturbs the divine dozing. It's crucial to the legend that this was emphatically not death as the ancient Egyptians knew it. As a mainstream historical fact, when a pharaoh died, they embarked upon a highly elaborate and critical 70-day mummification process. Specialized priests would remove the internal organs except the heart, the seat of intelligence and feeling, desiccate the body with natron salt to prevent decay, anoint it with precious oils and resins, and then meticulously wrap it in hundreds of yards of fine linen bandages, often incorporating protective amulets within the layers. This whole complex procedure was absolutely vital to ensure the pharaoh's successful transition into the afterlife. The resurrection of their Ba and Ka, and their eternal existence with Osiris. Amenemnesut, however, according to the legend of his slumber, bypassed all of this. His body remained intact, untouched by the embalmer's knife, preserved not by natron and linen, but by the very magic or divine will that had induced his sleep. He didn't need the Book of the Dead to guide him through the duat. His journey was into a different kind of night. Most pharaohs had a very strict pass away, get elaborately unwrapped and rewrapped, then proceed to the divine checkout for the afterlife itinerary. Amenemnesut. He apparently decided to skip the complicated bits and go straight to extended cosmic nap. A real time saver in the short term, if you think about it, though perhaps a bit perplexing for his designated heirs waiting to take over the throne. In the immediate aftermath, if the pharaoh's unique state wasn't widely understood by the entire court, there would have been confusion, hushed panic, and no doubt attempts by royal physicians to rouse him, all to no avail. But those few who were in the know, the keepers of the prophecy, would have understood. Their task, then, would have been to enact the next phase of the ancient plan to convey their sleeping king to his prepared, secret resting place, the hidden sunless chamber where he would lie undisturbed for ages to come, a task we shall explore in due course. A quirky tidbit that might resonate here is that some ancient Egyptian magical or meditative practices did indeed involve techniques for inducing trance-like states or seeking profound visions. These could include prolonged stillness, rhythmic chanting, focused breathing, or the use of specific incenses and sacred oils, all designed to shift consciousness and open pathways to the divine or the hidden realms. Perhaps Amenemnesut was deeply engaged in such a profound spiritual exercise, seeking ultimate union with the dream world he so revered, when the prophesied sleep finally and irrevocably claimed him. When examining such tales of rulers entering prolonged, unnatural sleep, or a state of suspended animation, which appear in various forms across many different cultures and historical periods, folklorists and comparative mythologists often debate their underlying meanings. Are these narratives primarily symbolic expressions of a deep-seated desire for the eventual return of a beloved Golden Age ruler? Do they reflect societal anxieties about the dangers of succession crises and unstable interregna? Or are they perhaps deeper psychological explorations of the mysterious boundary between life and death, consciousness and oblivion? For now, as the legend of Pharaoh Amenemnesut unfolds, the prophecy has been fulfilled. The enigmatic ruler, the scholar of dreams, has closed his eyes upon the world of waking. He is not dead, but deeply, profoundly asleep, his breath a mere whisper in the silence of eternity. The true mystery of his slumber and the secrets it holds are only just beginning to deepen. So, Pharaoh Amenemnesut has gracefully, or perhaps supernaturally, sidestepped the whole messy business of dying and the rather lengthy mummification process as we noted in our last section when he just fell into that profound, prophecy-foretold slumber. He's bypassed the traditional check-in for the Osirian afterlife. The next logical step, if you're one of his few loyal, highly discreet courtiers or priests who were in on this whole endless night prophecy, isn't to call the royal embalmers and start looking for canopic jars. Oh no, your primary concern now is to find a very, very good and exceptionally well hidden resting place. This isn't your average find a nice pre-booked spot in the Valley of the Kings kind of situation. This requires next-level secrecy, a chamber designed not for a journey into the afterlife, but for an eternity of undisturbed, magical sleep. The entire purpose of this hidden, sunless chamber is different. Traditional pharaonic tombs, for all their grandeur and elaborate security measures, a mainstream historical fact being their false corridors. Hidden entrances, deep shafts, and massive stone sarcophagi designed to deter an army of ancient tomb robbers were ultimately gateways, designed to facilitate the deceased king's passage into the next world and ensure his eternal sustenance there. They were, in a sense, meant to be visited, at least by the ka and ba of the deceased and by funerary priests performing rituals. But the resting place of the sleeping pharaoh, as the legend whispers, was conceived with the opposite intent to remain utterly sealed, completely undisturbed, a sanctuary for his suspended animation. Perhaps until a far distant, prophesied moment of awakening, or perhaps simply forever. Where would such a chamber be located? The legends are, as you might expect, tantalizingly vague, adding to the mystery. Some tales hint it was deep beneath the foundations of an existing, yet unassuming, provincial temple, its entrance concealed behind a false wall in a forgotten crypt, known only to the highest initiates of a secret cult. Others whisper of a lost pyramid from a much earlier, forgotten dynasty, its original purpose and occupant long faded from memory, now repurposed as a silent haven for Amenemnesut. Perhaps it was a natural cave system, a labyrinthine network extending far beneath the western desert, its entrance magically sealed and camouflaged by the shifting sands, discoverable only by those who knew the precise incantations or celestial alignments. The location of this chamber was likely top secret, probably not even marked on the ancient Egyptian equivalent of an Uber rideshare map. Okay, sacred charioteer. You need to turn left at the third giant sphinx, then go past the shrine of the slightly grumpy-looking jackal god Anubis. And if you accidentally hit the oasis of eternal mild discomfort, you've definitely gone too far back. The design and construction of this unique resting place would have been undertaken in the utmost secrecy, likely by a very small, very dedicated team of artisans and priests, all sworn to silence on pain of, well, probably something involving very unhappy gods and a distinct lack of a blessed afterlife for themselves. This wasn't a tomb to celebrate death, but a meticulously crafted cocoon to preserve a slumbering life. The walls wouldn't necessarily be covered in the usual vibrant scenes of the pharaoh hunting, feasting, or being welcomed by Osiris. Instead, they might be inscribed with powerful magical wards, protective hieroglyphic spells specifically designed to maintain his sleep, to calm his dreaming spirit, to repel any unwanted intruders, whether physical or supernatural, and perhaps even to magically mask the chamber's very existence from the outside world. And what of the chamber's interior? This sunless sanctuary. You can imagine it as a place of profound stillness and silence. The air would be cool, dry, and utterly motionless, untouched by the passage of time or the breath of the living. It might be simply furnished, focusing on the pharaoh himself, or perhaps it held a stark, otherworldly opulence. Amenemnesut would be lying not in a traditional sarcophagus meant for a mummy, but perhaps on a magnificent bed or couch of polished diorite or cedar wood, draped in the finest, undecaying linens. His features would be peaceful, serene, as if he had only just closed his eyes. No sign of physical decay, his body preserved by the same enchantment that held him in its thrall. The interior design was probably timeless slumber chic, very minimalist, no loud or distracting hieroglyphs, just a supremely comfortable eternal bed, maybe his favorite well-worn dream journal and a perfectly sharpened reed pen on the nightstand, and a very strict, magically enforced do not disturb for the next few millennia, please policy. There might be symbolic items placed around him, ankhs for life, jed pillars for stability, perhaps representations of protective deities like Bes or Taweret, or even figures associated with sleep and dreams. Though such details are lost in the hazy realm of legend, unlike a typical tomb, there would be no need for vast quantities of food offerings, no Ushabti figures to work for him in the afterlife. Because he wasn't in the afterlife, he was simply elsewhere in his own private pocket of eternity. Once Pharaoh Amenemneset was gently laid to rest within this specially prepared chamber, the crucial act would be to seal it. And this wouldn't just involve rolling a big stone in front of the door. The entrance would be meticulously disguised, made to look like an unbroken stretch of rock, or buried deep beneath tons of sand. Its location known only to those few initiates who then, perhaps, took that secret with them to their own, more conventional, graves. They didn't just lock the door and misplace the key for this one. We're talking serious, magically reinforced deterrence wards that might confuse the mind of any would-be discoverer, curses that promised a particularly unpleasant encounter with a grumpy scorpion goddess for anyone who even thought about looking for it. And probably a very complex series of abstract riddles guarded by a sphinx with a particularly bad head cold and an even worse attitude. Standard ancient Egyptian high-security measures, really, but dialed up to 11 for this unique situation. A quirky tidbit from actual Egyptian funerary architecture is the concept of the false door found in many tombs. This was a stone carving or painted representation of a door, usually on the west wall of the offering chapel, believed to be a magical portal through which the ka or spirit of the deceased could pass to receive offerings. One might imagine the true entrance to the sleeping pharaoh's hidden chamber being concealed behind such a false door, or perhaps the entire chamber itself was conceived as a kind of ultimate magical gateway, leading not to the field of reeds, but into a timeless, protected dreamscape. Archaeologists and historians, of course, often speculate with great excitement on the tantalizing possibility of undiscovered royal tombs or hidden caches still lying beneath the Egyptian sands. However, the specific idea of a pharaoh being intentionally preserved in a state of magical sleep, rather than being properly mummified for the traditional Osirian afterlife, falls firmly outside conventional Egyptological understanding. Such a legend, therefore, pushes us into the fascinating borderlands where history meets folklore, where deeply buried cultural symbols and imaginative storytelling traditions intertwine. And so, with the chamber sealed, its location a forgotten secret, Pharaoh Amenemneset is left to his endless slumber. The world above continues its noisy, bustling course. Dynasties rise and fall, empires crumble, but deep beneath the earth, the sleeping pharaoh dreams on, his presence a silent, enduring mystery, the legend of his undisturbed rest slowly taking root in the quiet corners of human memory, waiting to be whispered again. So, Pharaoh Amenemneset is now tucked away in his super-secret, magically warded sunless chamber, deep in his prophesied eternal nap. Presumably with a strict do not disturb until the next cosmic cycle sign hanging on the metaphysical doorknob, as we carefully sealed him in during our last section. You'd think that would be the end of it. Pharaoh sleeps soundly. Story concludes, roll credits, everyone go home. But a legend as intriguing, as profoundly mysterious as that of a perpetually snoozing king, especially one from the enigmatic land of Egypt, doesn't just fade away quietly into the desert dust. Oh no. It festers. It grows. It takes on new layers with each passing generation, and most importantly, it invites a whole lot of hopeful, desperate, or just plain curious people over the ensuing centuries to try and hit his divine snooze button one last time, or rather, to try and turn the alarm off completely and get him back on his royal feet. As the decades blend into centuries, and centuries perhaps into millennia, the precise historical memory of Amenemneset, the man, the dreamer, the scholar king, begins to fade. The exact location of his hidden chamber, once known only to a handful of sworn initiates, becomes the stuff of pure conjecture, a mythical coordinate on a forgotten map. But the legend itself, the potent idea of the sleeping pharaoh, endures. It's whispered by grandmothers to sleepy children, debated by desert mystics under starry skies, and perhaps even illicitly recorded by scribes in the margins of more orthodox religious texts. And as time goes on, various individuals and groups, for a multitude of reasons, would have felt compelled to seek him out, to try and rouse him from his timeless slumber. Why try to wake a magically sleeping pharaoh who, after a few thousand years, probably has cosmic level morning breath and would likely be very confused by, say, the invention of the chariot wheel if he went to sleep before it? Well, motivations, as always, are varied. In times of great crisis, famine, invasion, civil unrest, the desperate populace, or perhaps a faction of priests or nobles, might cling to the hope that the sleeping pharaoh, if awakened, could restore a lost golden age, his ancient wisdom and divine power a panacea for their current woes. The prophecy of his eventual return, if that was part of the original lore, would be fervently re-examined. Others, seekers of lost knowledge, might believe that Amenemnasut, in his unique state, held the keys to forgotten magical incantations, profound philosophical truths, or the secrets of the dream world he so revered. They might imagine his chamber not just as a bedroom, but as a library of arcane wisdom, and the pharaoh himself as its sleeping librarian. And inevitably, there would be the more pragmatically minded, or perhaps just greedy treasure hunters. Despite the legend emphasizing his unique slumber rather than a typical burial, the allure of any pharaonic resting place, especially one so shrouded in secrecy, would be irresistible to those dreaming of gold, jewels, and priceless artifacts. They might conveniently ignore the sleeping part and focus on the pharaoh part, hoping for a quick, if illicit, payday. So, the attempts to find and wake him would begin. Sporadic at first, perhaps then flaring up with renewed intensity whenever the legend resurfaced or a new clue was supposedly discovered. These attempts would have taken many forms. Later generations of priests or magicians, armed with their own evolving magical traditions, might try to break the ancient enchantment they believed held him captive. They would pore over obscure texts, perform elaborate rituals, chant powerful incantations, all designed to counteract the original slumber spell. Later, magicians would be like, right, the ancient papyri indicate that a sacred chant involving 7 perfectly preserved scarab beetles. The distilled dew from a lotus flower that has only ever seen moonlight, and a really, really good cup of imported chamomile tea should theoretically do the trick. Spoiler alert, it usually just resulted in some slightly confused scarab beetles and a magician who, ironically, then needed a very long nap himself from all the effort. Physical expeditions would also be launched. Intrepid or foolhardy adventurers, guided by fragments of the legend or the dubious directions of some self-proclaimed seer, would venture deep into the unforgiving desert, explore forgotten necropolises, or delve into the labyrinthine darkness of ancient, crumbling tombs, always hoping that the next sealed door, the next hidden passage, would lead them to the sunless chamber. The challenges they faced were immense. The original secrecy surrounding his resting place was designed to be foolproof. The magical wards and curses, if the legends were true, might still hold their power, deterring or even harming those who came too close with unwelcome intent. The desert itself was a formidable guardian, its shifting sands capable of swallowing landmarks and pathways, its harsh climate a trial for any expedition. And of course, there was always the risk of disturbing something else entirely, something ancient and best left sleeping in the deep places of the earth. It's a mainstream historical fact that throughout Egyptian history, and well into later periods including the Roman and Arab eras, there was a strong cultural tradition of rediscovering, reinterpreting, and often reusing or building upon ancient sacred sites and monuments. Later dynasties frequently looked back to the glories of earlier golden ages for inspiration, legitimacy, or even building materials. This ongoing interaction with the past could easily have fueled a continued interest in forgotten lore, including persistent legends like that of a sleeping pharaoh. A particularly quirky or fringe element that often appears in such sleeping hero tales is the idea of specific, almost fairy tale-like keys or conditions being necessary for the awakening. Perhaps the legend of Amenemnasut spoke of a particular lost artifact that had to be brought to his chamber, a specific incantation that could only be uttered by a direct descendant, a tricky proposition after a few millennia, or even a precise celestial alignment that occurred only once every 1,000 years, and which everyone kept just missing. This turns the quest from a simple search into a kind of metaphysical treasure hunt for a very specific, almost impossible solution. When analyzing these enduring legends of sleeping kings or hidden saviors that appear in so many diverse cultures across the world, anthropologists and historians often debate their primary societal functions. Do these tales primarily serve as potent expressions of collective hope and longing during prolonged periods of difficulty or oppression? Do they function as subtle critiques of current, perhaps inadequate, leadership by wistfully romanticizing a powerful ruler from a bygone golden age? Or are they perhaps repositories of deep-seated collective cultural memory, preserving, albeit in highly mythologized and symbolic forms, echoes of actual historical figures or events, whatever the deeper meaning? In the case of Pharaoh Amenemnasut, all these attempts, whether driven by piety, greed, or scholarly curiosity, ultimately proved futile. The legend always concludes with his slumber remaining unbroken. The success rate for waking the sleeping pharaoh was, to put it mildly, utterly abysmal. It makes trying to get a particularly stubborn teenager out of bed on a Monday morning look like a guaranteed first-try win. Amenemnasut was committed to his nap. Each failed attempt, each expedition that returned empty-handed, each magical ritual that produced no result, only served to deepen the mystery, to enhance the power of his enchantment, and to solidify the legend of the pharaoh who slept on, undisturbed by the fleeting concerns of the waking world. So, despite all those enthusiastic, if ultimately rather unsuccessful attempts by generations of well-meaning or treasure-hungry seekers to play cosmic alarm clock for Pharaoh Amenemnasut, as we just recounted in our previous exploration of their futile efforts, our legendary sleeping king remains resolutely, profoundly, and quite impressively asleep. Now, you might think this remarkable continuity of slumber is just down to some seriously potent ancient Egyptian magic, some top-tier magical soundproofing in his hidden sunless chamber, or perhaps simply the fact that ancient curses really packed a punch and had excellent longevity. But what if there was something more to it? What if, as some versions of the legend softly insist, there were, and perhaps in some hidden lineage still are, dedicated guardians, a secret society of eternal peacekeepers whose solemn multi-millennial mission is to ensure that no one, absolutely no one, disturbs the pharaoh's very long nap? If Amenemnesut's sleep was indeed part of a prophecy, a sacred state with a future purpose, or even a delicate magical balance, it stands to reason that measures would have been taken not just to hide him, but to actively protect his slumber. And this is where the legend introduces the idea of the guardians of the dreamer. These wouldn't be your standard, spear-carrying tomb guards, prone to nodding off themselves or being easily bribed with a bit of bread and beer. No, these would be a far more dedicated, more secretive, and perhaps more mystically inclined order. Imagine a priestly cult, formed perhaps from Amenemhotep's most trusted inner circle just before he fell asleep, or maybe one that coalesced around his legend in the centuries that followed, their sole purpose being the preservation of his sacred rest. Their job description probably read something like, "Wanted dedicated guardians for very important sleeping pharaoh." Must be exceptionally good at keeping secrets, enjoy extremely quiet and dimly lit environments, and be comfortable with a multi-millennial employment contract. Pension plan details, or currently pending his eventual awakening, if any. Apply in strictest confidence at the hidden desert location that you somehow already know about. Their duties would be manifold. First and foremost, maintaining the absolute secrecy of the pharaoh's hidden chamber. This would involve deflecting inquiries, spreading misinformation, perhaps even creating false trails or decoy tombs to lead astray any who came searching with unauthorized intent. They would be masters of misdirection, their knowledge of the desert's illusions and hidden paths unparalleled. Their main method of active guarding probably involved a lot of very stern shh. The pharaoh is attempting to get his full 8,000 years of sleep in, and maybe some strategically placed, very convincing beware of the particularly grumpy and highly venomous sacred asp. Signs, Munine, just to deter the casually curious and the easily intimidated. Beyond simple secrecy, these guardians might also be responsible for maintaining the magical wards and protective spells that were laid upon the chamber when it was first sealed. This could involve performing specific ancient rituals at certain astronomical alignments, reciting forgotten incantations to renew the enchantments, or perhaps tending to some kind of mystical energy source that sustained the pharaoh's suspended animation. They would be the keepers of the original esoteric knowledge surrounding Amenemnasut's unique state. A lore passed down from master to initiate through countless hushed generations. The legend sometimes hints at these guardians not always being part of a formally organized priestly order. Perhaps the secret was entrusted to a particular lineage of desert nomads, a family who, for reasons lost to time, became the hereditary protectors of the sacred site near which the pharaoh slept, their ancestral lands unknowingly or knowingly encompassing his hidden sanctuary. They might not fully understand the nature of who or what they were guarding, only that it was a place of immense power, ancient taboo, and not to be disturbed. Their motivations for such an enduring, thankless vigil would be complex. For some, it might be unwavering loyalty to a beloved pharaoh, a promise made by their ancestors to protect him until the prophesied time of his return. For others, it could be a deep-seated belief in the prophecy itself, the conviction that waking Amenemneset before his appointed hour could bring about some unimaginable catastrophe, or prevent a future good that only his reawakening at the correct moment could achieve. There might also be an element of fear, a respect for the immense unknown power contained within that sleeping form or his magically protected chamber. And, of course, for any secret order, there's the inherent prestige and sense of unique purpose that comes from being the sole keepers of such a profound mystery. It's a mainstream historical fact that many ancient Egyptian temples and highly sacred sites did indeed have dedicated priestly staffs and orders of keepers or servants of the god, Hemnecher, who were responsible for maintaining the daily cult, performing the sacred rituals, protecting valuable temple property and secret relics, and preserving the arcane religious knowledge associated with their particular deity or sanctuary. This often involved hereditary succession within priestly families or strict, lengthy initiations into different levels of the priesthood. So, the idea of a dedicated, secretive group protecting a sacred sleeping pharaoh, while legendary, certainly has plausible parallels within the known structures of ancient Egyptian religious organization. A quirky or fringe tidbit that the legend might include is that these guardians, over the millennia, developed unique, non-magical but highly effective methods of deterring those who got too close to discovering the truth. Perhaps they became masters of psychological suggestion, subtly turning seekers away with carefully planted doubts or unsettling omens. Or maybe they maintained a secret language or a complex system of symbols, known only to their order, for communicating vital information about threats to the pharaoh's rest, or for identifying fellow initiates. When examining traditions of long-standing secret societies or orders dedicated to protecting sacred sites, ancient knowledge, or legendary figures, historians and sociologists often debate the balance between any actual demonstrable historical continuity of such groups versus the powerful human tendency towards the invention of tradition that frequently occurs over very long periods, especially when direct, verifiable evidence is scarce. Are these legendary guardians an unbroken chain stretching back to Amenemnasut's time, or a later folkloric embellishment created to explain the enduring mystery of his undisturbed slumber? Whatever their precise historical reality within the framework of the legend, the guardians of the dreamer add another fascinating layer to the tale. They represent an unwavering dedication, a silent, multi-generational commitment to preserving not a memory of the dead, but the potential of a future awakening. They are the ultimate fans of a very, very long and exceptionally quiet concert, the concert of uninterrupted silence surrounding their king. They were, and perhaps still are, in the quietest corners of the legend, utterly committed to ensuring no unexpected encores, no premature interruptions, just endless, peaceful, pharaonic snoring, metaphorically speaking. Of course, as one assumes his slumber is perfectly silent. Their vigil ensures that Amenemnasut's eternal peace truly remains eternal, at least until the stars, or the prophecy, decree otherwise. So, we have our sleeping pharaoh, Amenemnasut, safely snoozing away in his ultra-secret, magically booby-trapped bedchamber. Thanks to the tireless, multi-millennial efforts of his dedicated fan club/security detail, the Guardians of the Dreamer. As we just discussed in the previous section, he's out like a divine light, indefinitely suspended in his timeless slumber. But the fascinating thing about legends, especially legends involving sleeping kings who might hold the key to a forgotten past or a brighter future, is that people rarely expect them to stay asleep forever. There's always that little, persistent, hopeful whisper that weaves its way through the generations. What if he wakes up? When will he wake up? And what will it mean when he finally does? These whispers of Amenemnasut's eventual return, his awakening from that endless night prophesied so long ago, remember that cryptic scroll, would become as integral to his legend as the story of his slumber itself. You can imagine these tales being told around flickering fires in desert encampments, shared by learned priests in temple scriptoriums, or passed down by village storytellers, each narrator adding their own subtle embellishments, their own interpretations of what this momentous event might entail. The prophecy for his return was probably, like the original one for his sleep, suitably grand and wonderfully specific in its vagueness. He shall awaken when the stars align in the forgotten pattern of the first time, when the sacred Bennu bird sings thrice upon the oldest sycamore, and when the heart of Egypt yearns with a singular, pure desire for his return. Or, you know, something equally helpful. Like, he'll be up when the Nile flows backwards. A particularly philosophical donkey learns to sing opera, and someone finally figures out what was really inside the Great Sphinx, and why it has that enigmatic little smile. So, any day now, basically. The conditions for his awakening, as foretold in these enduring folk tales, would vary. Perhaps it was a specific, preordained cosmic moment, a turning point in the great celestial clockwork, or maybe his return was contingent upon a time of unprecedented crisis for Egypt, a moment so dark that only a ruler of his legendary wisdom and unique connection to the deeper currents of existence could set things right. Some versions might even suggest that a particular sign or artifact was needed, a lost scepter to be found, a sacred ritual to be performed correctly by a worthy successor. And what would his awakening signify for the land of Egypt? This is where the folk tales truly blossomed with hope and, sometimes, a touch of trepidation. For many, his return would herald the dawn of a new golden age. Pharaoh Amenemnasut, having slept through centuries of turmoil and change, would awaken with his ancient wisdom untainted, his connection to the divine order pure and strong. He would restore Ma'at, bring justice and prosperity back to the two lands, and usher in an era of unparalleled peace and harmony. It's a classic king under the mountain trope, that beloved folkloric motif where a great leader isn't truly dead but merely sleeping, waiting to return when his people need him most. Others might believe that his awakening would bring forth a torrent of lost secrets. Having spent millennia in a state so close to the dream world, so near the veils between realities, he might awaken with profound insights into the nature of the cosmos, the will of the gods, or forgotten magical lore that could transform society. Imagine him waking up and casually explaining the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, before asking for a light snack and a summary of what he's missed. Right, so chariots are still a thing. Good. And this Roman Empire I keep hearing whispers about through the rock. Are they friendly? It would certainly be quite the culture shock for everyone involved. A few more ominous versions of the legend might hint that his return wouldn't be entirely benevolent. Perhaps he would awaken as a figure of judgment, a divine arbiter come to assess the deeds of the intervening ages, to separate the worthy from the unworthy, and to enact a great, world-altering reckoning. This adds a frisson of awe and fear to the anticipation of his return. Throughout Egyptian history, as a mainstream historical fact, there was a recurring cultural and religious tendency to look back to past golden ages, the era of the great pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom, or the powerful empire-building pharaohs of the New Kingdom, as ideals of perfect order, divine kingship, and national strength. In times of internal weakness, foreign domination, or societal stress, the hope for a restorer figure, someone who could bring back that lost glory, often emerged in popular sentiment and sometimes even in official propaganda. The enduring legend of a sleeping pharaoh who might one day awaken fits perfectly within this deep-seated cultural pattern of nostalgic hope. For centuries, if things got really truly bad in Egypt, another terrible famine. The sacred Apis bull developing a particularly bad case of divine indigestion, or yet another plague of unusually sarcastic and well-organized locusts. Someone, somewhere, would inevitably sigh and say, you know who would sort all this mess out properly? Old man Amenemneset from way back when? If only we could find his divinely appointed cosmic alarm clock, or perhaps just remember which dusty old prophecy detailed the correct wake-up procedure. A quirky or fringe tidbit that might be woven into these tales of his return is the idea that only a specific kind of person, or a particular set of circumstances, could successfully trigger his awakening or be worthy of witnessing it. Perhaps only an individual of absolute moral purity could approach his chamber without being struck down by its wards. Or maybe a complex riddle, passed down through the generations of his guardians, needed to be solved at the entrance. Some stories might even suggest that small, dedicated, and very secretive cults actively performed rituals not just to guard his sleep, but to try and hasten his prophesied return, believing they held the key to Egypt's salvation. Folklorists and historians of popular religion, when they study these return of the king or sleeping hero narratives from various cultures around the world, often analyze them to understand the underlying societal anxieties and aspirations of the people who tell and retell these stories. They debate whether such tales primarily function as a form of passive comfort, offering a sliver of hope during difficult and seemingly hopeless times, or if they can sometimes inspire more active forms of resistance or calls for reform by holding up an idealized past ruler as a stark contrast to perceived current injustices or inadequacies. Or perhaps they serve as a vital means of preserving a sense of cultural identity and continuity through the veneration of these idealized ancestral figures. For the legend of Amenemnesut, these whispers of his eventual return, these folk tales filled with longing and anticipation, are what kept his memory, and his mystery, alive through the long, silent centuries of his slumber. They transformed him from merely a forgotten king in a hidden tomb into an enduring symbol of hope, a promise that, even in the deepest darkness, a return to light and order might one day be possible. The pharaoh sleeps. Yes, but in the dreams of his people, he is always on the verge of waking. So, while generations of Egyptians were busy whispering in hushed tones about when, oh when, Pharaoh Amenemnesut might finally decide his multi-millennial power nap was over and grace the world with his awakened presence as we hopefully dreamed about in our last section. The very idea of him being out there, perpetually snoozing in his secret, magically guarded, sandy bedchamber, began to subtly seep into the fabric of everyday life. Like a faint perfume of forgotten incense or the almost imperceptible taste of desert dust on the morning breeze. His legend wasn't just a maybe he'll come back someday kind of epic saga. It started to gently color how ordinary people thought about the mysteries of sleep, the enigmatic world of dreams, and perhaps even some of their own quiet, nightly rituals. You can imagine that in a land where dreams were often seen as potent messages from the gods or glimpses into the future, remember Amenemhotep's own fascination. The legend of a pharaoh who existed in an eternal dream state would have added another layer of reverence, and perhaps a touch of trepidation, to the nightly act of surrendering to slumber. Did people wonder if their own dreams might somehow brush against his, like two papyrus boats passing silently on the great, dark river of the collective unconscious? If you had a particularly vivid or perplexing dream, you might ponder if it was a mere fancy, a message from a more conventional deity, or just maybe a faint, fleeting echo from the dreaming mind of the sleeping king himself. Oh, I dreamt of 7 plump geese flying backwards over a field of blue lotus. Wait, wrong famous dream. More like, I dreamt the great sleeping pharaoh offered me a slightly dusty, but undoubtedly sacred fig. Does that mean good luck is coming? Or just that his subterranean chamber could really use a good airing out and perhaps a visit from the royal fruit basket delivery service? Dream interpretation probably got really specific and interesting in circles where his legend was strong. It's not hard to picture certain nightly rituals evolving, inspired by his story. Perhaps, in some households, before tucking their children into their reed mats. Parents would whisper a small prayer for a peaceful and, importantly, a temporary night's rest, subtly invoking the image of the pharaoh as a reminder of what too much sleep could entail. Bedtime stories, those ancient conduits of culture and caution, would almost certainly have featured the tale of the sleeping pharaoh. Egyptian parents probably had the ultimate, if slightly terrifying, bedtime story to encourage prompt slumber. Now, little Nefer, you must close your eyes and go straight to sleep, like a good child, because if you stay awake too long, the actual sleeping pharaoh, who is the champion of all sleepers, might get a bit jealous of your excessive wakefulness and decide to, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to accidentally oversleep for a few millennia. Would you? Guaranteed to make even the most boisterous child pull the papyrus fiber blankets right up over their heads. In regions where his legend was particularly potent, perhaps near the supposed, though lost location of his hidden chamber, or in areas that once prospered greatly under his fictional waking rule, people might have developed specific local customs. Maybe they'd leave out a tiny offering, a sip of cool water or a few dates, by their bedsides, a gesture not for the usual household gods, but a quiet nod to the slumbering king, hoping for his benevolent, if distant, protection during their own vulnerable hours of sleep. Or perhaps they'd wear small, unassuming amulets. Not the grand ones of lapis and gold, but something simple, a carved piece of wood or a smooth river stone, believed to ward off the kind of profound enchantment that held Amenemnasut, ensuring their own nightly rest was just that, a rest, not a one-way ticket to dreamland eternal. Some folks might have even developed a quirky little nightly ritual. Okay, bar the door. Check for scorpions under the mat. Leave a tiny crumb of bread and a single grain of incense for Amenemnasut, just in case he's feeling a bit peckish or fancies a change of aroma in his eternal sleep. And then recite 3 times fast. May my slumber be deep and entirely restful, but not, cosmically, legendarily restful. Just covering all the important bases, really. Ancient Egyptian popular religion and everyday magic, as a mainstream historical fact, were incredibly rich with apotropaic rituals, those practices designed to ward off evil, bad luck, or malevolent influences, spells against night terrors, demonic visitors in the dark, or simply bad dreams were commonplace, often inscribed on headdress, amulets, or papyri kept near the sleeper. The legend of the sleeping pharaoh, a figure existing in a permanent, supernaturally protected state of slumber, could easily tap into and subtly influence these existing concerns and practices around the vulnerability and mystery of sleep. A quirky or fringe tidbit that might have emerged from this confluence of legend and practice could be certain forms of dream incubation. This was the ancient practice of sleeping in a sacred spot, often a temple or shrine, in the hope of receiving a divine dream, a message, or a healing vision. Perhaps in areas where Amenemnasut's legend was strong, certain desolate ruins or quiet, hidden caves, rumored to be close to his influence or his dreaming spirit, became informal sites for such practices. People might go there to sleep, hoping to receive some echo of his profound wisdom, a solution to their problems, or just a really, really good night's rest under his distant, sleepy patronage. As centuries passed and new faiths and cultures overlaid the old, the core motif of the sleeping pharaoh might have syncretized, blending with later Coptic Christian tales of sleeping saints or with Islamic-era folklore about hidden imams or slumbering heroes awaiting a call. The specific names and details might change, but that potent image of a powerful, benevolent figure resting in a hidden place, destined to return, could easily adapt and find new resonance. Folklorists and cultural historians often debate the half-life of ancient legends like this, and how they genuinely transform or become subtly reinterpreted over centuries of oral and textual transmission. They question whether specific local customs or deeply ingrained folk beliefs can be definitively and directly traced back to a single ancient, legendary source, such as that of a sleeping pharaoh, or if these practices instead represent broader, more diffuse cultural anxieties, hopes, and ways of making sense of the world that simply find a convenient and resonant hook in such enduring tales. Regardless of the precise scholarly interpretations, it's clear that the legend of Pharaoh Amenemnesit, The king who chose an eternity of dreams over the well-trodden path to the field of reeds would have left its subtle but persistent mark on the collective imagination of those who lived in his shadow, or rather, in the shadow of his slumber. His story served as a constant, quiet reminder of the profound mysteries hidden beneath the sands, the thin veil between waking and dreaming, and the enduring power of a truly epic nap. It wasn't just a grand tale of a king, it became part of the quiet, nocturnal landscape of Egyptian belief. So, the legend of our sleeping pharaoh. Amenemnasut has been diligently kept alive for untold centuries by those hushed whispers around desert campfires, by fireside tales passed from grandparent to grandchild, and perhaps by a few deeply ingrained, quirky local bedtime rituals that subtly acknowledged his eternal nap. As we gently uncovered in our last section, his slumber is a cornerstone of forgotten folklore. But what happens when the age of romantic legend and oral tradition begins to intersect with the new, exciting, and often rather dusty age of scientific archaeology? Do the keen eyes of excavators, the patient sifting through sand and rubble with trowels and brushes, finally unearth definitive proof of his existence and his unique state? Or do they simply uncover more layers to this already deeply shrouded mystery? As you drift into the 19th and early 20th centuries, you find Egypt becoming a focal point for intense archaeological exploration. Intrepid adventurers, dedicated scholars, and sometimes just wealthy enthusiasts from Europe and America, armed with a mixture of romantic notions and emerging scientific methods, descend upon the Nile Valley, eager to uncover the secrets of its ancient civilization. And while most are searching for the grand tombs of well-known pharaohs, or seeking to decipher the hieroglyphs on temple walls, a few, perhaps those with a penchant for the more obscure and esoteric, might become captivated by the persistent, if elusive, legend of the sleeping pharaoh. These weren't always your swashbuckling Indiana Jones types, all bullwhips and daring escapes from collapsing tombs. More often, they were meticulous, slightly eccentric figures. Your Professor Pince-Nez squinting at a tiny pottery shard for 6 hours straight and then declaring it to be possibly quite significant. Or, then again, perhaps just a very old fragment of a workman's lunch bowl. The real thrill for them was often in the painstaking piecing together of the faintest of clues. And the legend, it seems, obliges by offering up just enough tantalizing, if frustratingly ambiguous, evidence to keep these seekers perpetually intrigued. Imagine, if you will, a team of early excavators, perhaps working in a little explored section of a vast necropolis, stumbling upon a tomb from what they identify as roughly Amenemnasut's supposed era. They clear the entrance, their hearts pounding with anticipation, only to find it strangely empty. Or not empty in the usual plundered sense, but rather unplundered, yet also devoid of a mummy. No canopic jars holding preserved organs, none of the usual funerary accoutrements for the journey to Osiris. Instead, they might find a magnificent, perfectly preserved but unoccupied bed or couch of state, and perhaps strange, unique hieroglyphic inscriptions on the walls, texts that don't match the standard Book of the Dead, but speak instead of an eternal dreaming, a slumber beyond ages, or a guardian of the threshold of night. Or perhaps, in some dusty archive in Cairo or London, a patient philologist, painstakingly translating a bundle of newly acquired fragmentary papyrus, comes across a passage that seems to corroborate a key element of the ancient prophecy we discussed earlier, the one foretelling Amenemnasut's endless night. The text might be damaged, the context unclear, but the phrases leap out, and he shall not taste death, but drink deep of the river of slumber, until the stars realign. Another piece of the puzzle, or just another beautifully crafted red herring from the ancient world, which, let's be honest, absolutely loved its cryptic pronouncements. Then there are the architectural anomalies. Maybe an archaeological survey team, using new techniques to map the subsurface of a well-known temple complex, discovers a previously unknown, deeply buried chamber that seems to have no discernible entrance and doesn't fit any known ritual purpose. Or they find a sealed passageway in a royal tomb that inexplicably leads to a solid bedrock wall, as if its true destination was deliberately obscured or never meant to be reached by conventional means. Such finds would fuel endless speculation. Was this the hidden access to the sunless chamber? And what about artifacts? Perhaps a unique amulet is found, depicting a pharaoh not in the usual majestic striding pose, or as Osiris, but in a serene, reclining posture, eyes closed in what looks like peaceful, profound sleep rather than death. Or as a particularly quirky tidbit, imagine the discovery of a set of perfectly preserved ancient Egyptian linens, perhaps from an obscure offering cache, that, when unsealed, still exude the faintest, unidentifiable scent of some unknown, incredibly potent soporific herb, a perfume designed to lull even the gods to sleep. Another example could be an unusual reserve head statue. These were real Old Kingdom sculptures, often starkly realistic, intended as a spare head for the deceased's ka, but this particular one, dating from a later fitting period, depicts a pharaoh with eyes gently closed, not in the rictus of death, but in a remarkably lifelike, peaceful state of deep slumber. Each of these fictional clues, you understand, would be tantalizingly ambiguous, always open to multiple interpretations, never quite providing that definitive, smoking hieroglyph proof. They would ignite bursts of excitement among those dedicated to the legend, fuel new theories, perhaps even inspire new, equally fruitless expeditions. But the mainstream archaeological establishment, the more conventional Egyptologists, would likely view such findings with considerable skepticism. They might dismiss the empty chamber as simply an unfinished tomb, the papyrus fragment as a misunderstood mythological text, the strange amulet as a unique but not necessarily supernatural artistic variation. They'd be the original party poopers of legendary discovery, probably sighing, adjusting their academic spectacles, and saying, "Yes, quite fascinating. My dear fellow, now about these very verifiable Middle Kingdom agricultural tax records we've just unearthed. Those are truly exciting." This dynamic is not unlike the real-world public fascination that erupted after mainstream historical discoveries, such as Howard Carter's finding of Tutankhamun's largely intact tomb in 1992. That astonishing discovery, with its dazzling treasures, fueled a global Egyptomania and endless popular speculation about pharaonic curses and hidden wonders, demonstrating the immense public appetite for the mysteries of ancient Egypt. The search for clues to the sleeping pharaoh in our legend would be a more niche, more esoteric version of this same human desire to uncover lost secrets. When genuinely enigmatic archaeological finds do emerge that don't fit neatly into established historical frameworks or conventional understandings, Egyptologists and other historians often engage in vigorous, sometimes quite heated, debate regarding their authenticity, their precise dating, and their proper interpretation. There's always a delicate balance to be struck between the scholarly excitement of potential new discoveries that could rewrite our understanding and the rigorous evidence-based demands of academic discipline, alongside the crucial need to avoid sensationalism or wishful thinking. So, for the followers of the Sleeping Pharaoh legend, these puzzling archaeological clues, whether real within the story's internal logic or simply hopeful interpretations of unrelated finds, serve not to solve the mystery, but to deepen it. They keep the flame of the legend alive, suggesting that the truth of Amenemnet's eternal slumber might indeed be out there, buried just beneath the next dune, hidden behind the next sealed door, or encoded within the next unread papyrus, waiting for a truly understanding eye, or perhaps just a very, very sleepy mind, to finally comprehend it. So those tantalizing, if frustratingly ambiguous, archaeological clues we just sifted through in our previous section, the strangely empty tomb, the cryptic papyrus fragment, that unsettlingly lifelike sleeping statue head, they might offer fleeting, shimmery hints of something extraordinary, but they don't exactly scream, "The sleeping pharaoh was definitely here, and here's his official eternal slumber itinerary from the desert rooftops." For a legend as profound and delicate as that of Pharaoh Amenemnet, and his endless nap to truly endure, for its subtle details, its whispered prophecies, and its profound mysteries to be carefully carried across the vast ocean of ages, you need more than just suggestive pottery shards or an unusually preserved piece of ancient linen. You need people. You need dedicated, devoted, and perhaps just a little bit wonderfully obsessive. keepers of the secret. Remember those original ancient guardians of the dreamer we imagined? The ones who first sealed Amenemneset away in his sunless chamber and protected his initial a sacred slumber. Well, as centuries and then millennia inevitably rolled by, their direct lineage, their precise rituals, might have faded into the mists of time, like inscriptions slowly worn smooth by desert winds. But the idea of guardianship, the profound responsibility of preserving the truth, or at least the legend, of the sleeping pharaoh, could well have taken on new forms, reincarnating in small, discrete circles of individuals drawn to the enduring mystery. These keepers of the secret wouldn't necessarily be grand. Conspiratorial organizations with secret handshakes and elaborate underground lairs, though? Who knows, perhaps some of them enjoyed a bit of theatrical flair. More likely, they were small, scattered groups of scholars, mystics, antiquarians, or simply deeply curious souls, bound together by their shared fascination with this one extraordinary sleeping king. You can picture them in different eras, perhaps a quiet, philosophical circle in Hellenistic Alexandria, poring over half-understood Egyptian texts that hinted at Amenemneset's unique fate, or maybe a reclusive Coptic monastic order in the early Christian centuries, carefully preserving ancient scrolls that the wider world had deemed heretical or irrelevant. Among them fragments pertaining to the king who did not die. Why, later still, you might find a secretive group of Renaissance Hermeticists or alchemists, obsessed with Egyptian wisdom, who believed the sleeping pharaoh held the key to some profound alchemical or spiritual secret. And then, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, as Egyptology blossomed, these keepers might have been found amongst the more eccentric, fringe antiquarians and occultists, those who looked beyond the mainstream discoveries for deeper hidden truths. Their aims would be varied, but united by the pharaoh, primarily, they would be dedicated to studying the legend. This would involve painstakingly collecting every shred of information they could find, transcribing crumbling papyri, recording fading oral traditions from remote villages, trying to decipher cryptic symbols found in obscure tombs, and attempting to piece together the fragmented prophecy of his slumber and his potential awakening. Their secret society meetings were probably less hooded figures chanting ominously in a candlelit subterranean crypt, and more three rather dusty scholars in the dimly lit back room of an old library, whispering excitedly about a new interpretation of a particularly obscure hieroglyph pertaining to divine napping, while trying very hard not to spill lukewarm tea on a priceless, fragile manuscript. Very low-key, very dedicated. Secondly, they would see it as their sacred duty to preserve this knowledge, to ensure that the legend of Amenemneset and the unique wisdom it might contain was not entirely lost to the passage of time or the skepticism of a more pragmatic world. They would be the careful custodians of his story, copying texts, translating them, and passing down the lore, perhaps through a master-apprentice system, from one generation of keepers to the next. And in some cases, these keepers might also see themselves as protectors of the secret itself, much like the original guardians. If they believed they held clues to the pharaoh's actual resting place, or understood the true nature of the enchantment surrounding him, they would be fiercely protective of this knowledge, guarding it from those they deemed unworthy, from reckless treasure hunters who might disturb his slumber for mere gold, or from those in power who might seek to exploit his legend for their own mundane purposes. Their work was a slow, patient, often unrewarding vigil, a dedication to a profound mystery that offered few, if any, worldly benefits. Their motto was probably something like, "Sleep on, great pharaoh, we've got this quietly." A mainstream historical fact that lends a certain plausibility to the idea of such dedicated esoteric groups is that throughout history, particularly from the Renaissance onwards, various secret societies and mystical orders, like the Rosicrucians, certain interpretations of Freemasonry, or later groups such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, have indeed shown a profound and enduring fascination with ancient Egyptian wisdom, symbolism, magic, and supposed hidden knowledge. They often incorporated Egyptian motifs and philosophical concepts into their own complex belief systems and elaborate rituals. Seeing ancient Egypt as a fount of primordial truth It's not too much of a stretch to imagine a splinter group within such a tradition becoming singularly focused on the unique legend of a pharaoh who mastered a different kind of eternity. As a quirky or fringe tidbit, the legend might suggest that these later keepers, over the centuries, developed their own unique initiation rites or possessed a single, incredibly ancient and sacred relic that connected them to Amenemnasut's slumber. Perhaps their initiation involved a ritual period of induced, dreamlike contemplation in a specially prepared dark room, attempting to symbolically access the pharaoh's dreaming mind. Or maybe they guarded a small, unassuming object, a dreaming stone of polished lapis lazuli, or even a tiny, impossibly preserved fragment of Amenemnasut's original funerary linen, which they believed acted as a conduit to his sleeping spirit, their most precious and closely guarded secret. Any luck deciphering the prophecy of the eternally unchanged royal bed linen yet? Brother Thothmes. Not precisely, esteemed Sister Sithathor, but I have a new theory involving the precise alignment of its weave with the constellation of the sacred goose during a solar eclipse. It's a work in very slow progress, requiring more quiet contemplation and perhaps another cup of that rather sleepy herbal tea. The actual historical influence, and indeed the very continuity, of purported ancient secret societies is, of course, such a perennial topic of vigorous debate among serious historians. It's a field often muddled by romantic embellishment, wishful thinking, and a distinct lack of concrete, verifiable evidence, making it incredibly difficult to separate historically verifiable groups with traceable lineages from later legendary constructions. Deliberate mystifications, or even outright fabrications designed to lend an air of ancient authority to newer ideas. But, within the gentle and unfolding narrative of the Sleeping Pharaoh, these dedicated keepers of the secret, whether they were a continuous, unbroken chain or a series of disconnected but similarly inspired individuals and groups, play a vital role. They are the quiet librarians of his legend, the patient guardians of his mystery. Through their tireless, often unacknowledged efforts, through their dusty scrolls and whispered traditions, they ensure that Pharaoh Amenemnasut is not entirely forgotten, that the possibility of his unique existence and his eventual prophesied awakening continues to resonate. A soft, sleepy note played across the grand, silent expanse of Egyptian time. Their dedication is the thread that keeps his story from unraveling completely in the face of an ever-changing world. So, for untold centuries, perhaps even millennia, those dedicated, if rather shadowy, keepers of the secret whom we just met in their dusty libraries and hidden, lamp-lit meeting spots have been diligently poring over fragmented papyri and whispered traditions, all centered on the enduring sleepy enigma of Pharaoh Amenemnasut and his remarkably persistent nap. They guard the legend, they study it, they preserve it. But as you lie there, drifting along with this ancient, sand-blown tale, you might find yourself gently starting to wonder, what does this sleep of his actually mean? Is it to be taken as a literal, magically induced, multi-millennial siesta? Or is there something more profound, more symbolic, more deeply resonant to this legend of the pharaoh who chose an endless night over the well-trodden path to the field of reeds? If you were to take the legend at its most literal face value, you'd be envisioning Pharaoh Amenemneset in a state of actual suspended animation, his body perfectly preserved by some forgotten enchantment or divine intervention. His life processes slowed to an almost imperceptible crawl, awaiting that far-distant prophesied moment of reawakening. This interpretation opens up a whole fascinating can of ancient Egyptian superworms. What kind of incredible magic could achieve such a feat? Was it a spell known only to him, or to a select few priests of a forgotten god? What were the cosmic rules governing such a state? If it's literal sleep, you have to wonder about the really practical long-term considerations. Does he get cosmic-level bed sores? Who is responsible for changing the divine bed linens every few centuries or so? And imagine the truly epic case of morning hair and morning breath he'd have upon finally waking up after several millennia. The royal dentists and hairdressers of that future era would have their work cut out for them. But perhaps, as with many enduring myths, The sleep is not meant to be entirely literal. Maybe it's a profound metaphor, a rich symbol with multiple layers of meaning. The legend could be interpreted as the sleep of a kingdom or a culture. Pharaoh Amenemnesut, representing a lost golden age of wisdom, peace, or spiritual insight, lies dormant while the world above goes through cycles of turmoil and forgetfulness. His prophesied awakening would then symbolize the longed-for return of that idealized past, a renaissance of ancient glories. It's a bit like when your old, reliable computer goes into a very deep sleep mode. It's still there, technically, all its important files intact, but not much use to anyone until someone figures out the correct sequence of arcane key presses, or in this case, fulfills an ancient and probably very complicated prophecy to bring it back to life. Alternatively, his slumber could be a metaphor for hidden knowledge. Amenemnesut, the scholar pharaoh, the dreamer, might represent a vast repository of lost wisdom, esoteric teachings, or forgotten truths, all locked away within his sleeping mind or within his hidden chamber, waiting for a worthy seeker to rediscover them. His awakening, in this sense, would be the rediscovery of these profound secrets, bringing enlightenment to a future age. Given his legendary fascination with dreams, remember his personal dream library and his attempts to understand their deeper meanings. His sleep might even be a unique, self-induced, and incredibly prolonged spiritual journey, an odyssey of the soul through the vast landscapes of the dream world itself. A form of communion with the divine or the collective unconscious that transcends ordinary life and the conventional Osirian afterlife. Then there's the possibility that his slumber represents a kind of divine state, something beyond our mortal understanding of sleep or death. Perhaps he's not merely asleep in the way we experience it, but exists in a profound, godlike trance, a state of being where he is simultaneously present and absent, connected to the currents of time and eternity in a way that ordinary mortals, or even ordinary mummified pharaohs, are not. The ancient Egyptians, as a mainstream historical fact, viewed sleep itself as a state imbued with considerable spiritual significance. They saw it as a kind of temporary death, a period when the Bea soul could leave the physical body and travel, sometimes to other worlds or to receive messages from the gods or the spirits of the deceased. Dreams were often considered to be direct communications from these other realms. Against this cultural backdrop, the idea of a pharaoh entering into a particularly profound, divinely ordained, and supernaturally extended state of sleep wouldn't be entirely out of place. It would be an amplified, royal version of a recognized spiritual possibility. A quirky or fringe tidbit that aligns with this idea is that some obscure ancient Egyptian religious texts and magical spells actually speak of advanced techniques for achieving what we might now call conscious dreaming or lucid dreaming, methods for maintaining awareness within the dream state, for navigating it intentionally, and even for communicating with deities or gaining hidden knowledge through controlled dream experiences. Perhaps Pharaoh Amenemnesut wasn't just a collector of dream interpretations, but the ultimate ancient master practitioner of such an esoteric art, his legendary sleep being, in reality, a permanent, incredibly advanced form of conscious, divine dreaming, a state of being he actively sought and achieved. The beauty of a legend like that of the Sleeping Pharaoh is precisely its ambiguity. It doesn't offer neat, tidy explanations. It allows for all these interpretations, literal, metaphorical, spiritual, to coexist, to shimmer alongside each other like heat haze over the desert sands. This is what makes it such a soothing, boring, in the best, most sleep-inducing way tale. It doesn't demand that you solve it, it simply invites you to ponder, to wonder, to drift along with its gentle, enigmatic current. When analyzing myths that involve figures experiencing prolonged, supernatural slumber, and such tales exist in many cultures, from King Arthur under the hill to Barbarossa in the Kyffhäuser mountain, scholars from a wide range of disciplines, including mythology, psychology, folklore, and religious studies, often engage in fascinating debates. They explore whether these narratives reflect literal, albeit fantastical, beliefs in the possibility of suspended animation, whether they serve as complex, layered metaphors for societal renewal, individual spiritual transformation, or the cyclical nature of time, or whether they primarily articulate deep-seated human anxieties and fervent hopes about mortality, the persistence of memory, and the elusive nature of consciousness itself. For our purposes, as you lie there, letting these thoughts drift, the true nature of Pharaoh Amenemnasut's sleep can remain one of the legend's most gentle and enduring mysteries. Whether he was literally napping on a cosmic scale, a symbol of a dormant ideal, or a soul voyaging through eternal dreamscapes, his slumber created a space for wonder, for quiet contemplation. It's a sleep that invites not investigation with a pickaxe and shovel, but rather a quiet closing of your own eyes, a gentle surrender to the mysteries of your own nightly rest, perchance to dream alongside him, in your own way. So, after we've journeyed through those ancient prophecies foretelling an endless night, explored the rumored design of a hidden sunless chamber, met the dedicated multi-millennial guardians, and pondered the very nature, be it literal, metaphorical, or divinely transcendental, of Pharaoh Amenemnasut's epic nap as we did in our last few sleepy sections, you might find yourself gently blinking, back in your own, very modern, very much awake bed, wondering what do we, in our current age, make of all this? How does a 21st century mind, so often steeped in scientific reasoning, digital immediacy, and a healthy dose of skepticism, approach such an ancient, dream-soaked, and resolutely unproven legend from the sands of time? Well, your first, very understandable modern reaction might be to file the entire tale under charming but entirely fanciful folklore. If you were to present the legend of a magically sleeping pharaoh, preserved not by mummification but by enchantment, to your average modern scientist or a hard-nosed historian, they'd probably, after a polite listen, prescribe a strong cup of coffee, a robust reality check, and perhaps suggest you submit a grant application to study comparative analysis of mass folkloric wish fulfillment narratives in pre-industrial societies. They're not always a barrel of laughs when it comes to millennia-old magical naps. Those wonderfully rational folks, the distinct lack of verifiable, peer-reviewed archaeological evidence, no conveniently labeled Pharaoh Amenemnesit's eternal sleep chamber. Please do not disturb until fourth millennium signs have ever been unearthed, would, for many, relegate the story firmly to the realm of myth. A beautiful but ultimately baseless fireside tale. And yet, despite our modern inclination towards empirical proof and rational explanations, these kinds of ancient mysteries hold an undeniably enduring romantic appeal. There's something deeply captivating about the idea of a lost world, a hidden truth, a secret slumbering just beyond our grasp. The legend of the sleeping pharaoh, with its hints of forgotten magic, ancient wisdom, and a ruler caught in a timeless pause, taps directly into that part of us that still yearns for enchantment, for a world a little less mundane, a little more mysterious. It's the same allure that draws us to tales of Atlantis, of Shangri-La, of kings asleep under mountains. Even if our logical brain says impossible, a quieter, more imaginative part of us whispers, but what if? This is why the trope of the sleeping king or the hidden ancient wisdom continues to surface in modern fiction, in art, and in various esoteric and spiritual explorations. Even if Pharaoh Amenemnesit himself isn't named, from a psychological perspective, you could say the legend resonates with some of our own modern anxieties and desires. In our noisy, hyper-connected, relentlessly productive, never quite switched off contemporary world, the idea of a pharaoh just sleeping profoundly, completely undisturbed for millennia. Honestly, it sounds less like a dreadful curse and more like an incredibly attractive, all-inclusive vacation package. Sign me up for the eternal undisturbed slumber and no email notifications retreat. Please. The legend might also touch upon our complex relationship with time, the fear of it passing too quickly, the longing for a pause, or even a deep-seated anxiety about mortality and what lies beyond. Sleep, in this context, can become a metaphor for ultimate peace, a perfect withdrawal from the stresses and strains of existence, or conversely, a symbol of a life unlived, a potential unfulfilled, depending on how you choose to interpret it. Of course, where there's ancient mystery and a lack of hard evidence, you'll inevitably find it co-opted by some of the more shall we say, imaginative theories that tend to bubble up from the fringes. There will always be those who might suggest that the sleeping pharaoh wasn't just magically asleep, but was actually an ancient astronaut in a state-of-the-art cryosuspension pod, patiently waiting for his spaceship to be repaired by a secret order of hyper-intelligent desert lizards. Which is, certainly a theory, a very creative, if slightly unhieroglyphically supported, theory. But even these more outlandish interpretations, yeah, however far-fetched, speak to that same enduring human fascination with finding extraordinary explanations for lingering ancient mysteries. But beyond the skepticism and the more colorful fringe ideas, there's also a genuine appreciation for the legend simply as cultural heritage. As folklore, even if Pharaoh Amenemnesit never literally slept for millennia, his story, as a product of the ancient Egyptian imagination, or the later imaginations that kept his tale alive, tells us something valuable about the hopes, fears, and worldview of the people who told it. It's a window, however hazy, into their understanding of kingship, divinity, magic, and the profound mysteries of life, death, and, of course, sleep. And in its gentle unfolding mystery, its focus on quietude and timeless slumber, it becomes uniquely suited for a narrative designed to lull us, in our own time, into a state of calm and rest. It's a mainstream historical fact that modern Egyptology, for all its incredible advancements as a rigorous scientific discipline, still grapples with the sheer immensity and complexity of ancient Egyptian civilization. There remain countless undeciphered texts, vast unexplored desert regions, innumerable unanswered questions, and tombs that are known to exist but have not yet been located or fully excavated. This constant reality of more to discover naturally leaves room for the popular imagination, and sometimes indeed for more speculative theories and to try and fill in those intriguing gaps. And we only need to look at the Curse of the Pharaohs phenomenon that erupted in the media after the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in the 1920s, a quirky tidbit of modern history in itself, to see how readily and eagerly the modern public can embrace the idea of ancient Egyptian magic, mystery, and supernatural power, even when more mundane scientific explanations are offered for the various unfortunate events that followed the tomb's opening. The legend of the sleeping pharaoh, with its core of inexplicable, timeless slumber, taps into a very similar vein of popular fascination with the uncanny and the ancient. Cultural critics and media scholars often analyze precisely how these ancient myths and legends are constantly being reinterpreted, repackaged, and remythologized in contemporary popular culture, from blockbuster movies to novels to, well, sleepy history podcasts. They debate whether these modern retellings primarily serve as escapist entertainment, whether they subtly reflect our current societal values, anxieties, and aspirations, or if they perhaps offer new and valid ways of engaging with those perennial human questions about existence that the original myths also sought to address. So, as you lie there, considering the legend of Amenemnesit from your 21st century vantage point, you might find that its power doesn't necessarily depend on whether you believe a man literally slept for thousands of years. Its enduring allure, its quiet mystery, and its ability to gently capture the imagination across the ages. These things remain. The sands of time may have obscured the truth, if ever there was one singular truth to begin with, but they haven't entirely managed to bury the soft, persistent whisper of the sleeping pharaoh. And so, as our journey through the sandy veils of time and legend draws to a gentle close, you find yourself contemplating the figure of Pharaoh Amenemnesut, not as a dusty historical entry, nor as a solved archaeological puzzle, but as an enduring enigma, the heart of a story that has whispered its way through millennia. We've considered the modern perspectives, the skepticism, the romanticism, and even the occasional rather outlandish theory that such an ancient mystery inevitably attracts. But beyond all that, what remains is the quiet, timeless allure of the sleeping pharaoh himself, and the eternal, dream-filled rest that the legend bestows upon him. The true power of this legend, the reason it has likely persisted in some form or another in the quiet corners of human imagination, lies not in any verifiable fact, but in its very essence. It's the profound mystery of it all, the unanswered questions, the hidden chamber. Remember those secret wards and guardians, the unknown purpose of his slumber, It's the concept of timelessness, a pharaoh existing outside the normal rush of hours and ages, a still point in a turning world. And perhaps most potently for us, as we lie here seeking our own nightly rest, it's the overwhelming sense of peace, of profound, undisturbed, and magically protected slumber. Pharaoh Amenemnasut, in his legendary state, is the undisputed, undefeated, heavyweight champion of napping. He makes Rip Van Winkle look like an amateur who just needed a slightly longer coffee break and perhaps a better alarm clock. This is precisely why the tale of the sleeping pharaoh makes for such a wonderfully soothing, boring in the most positive, sleep-inducing sense of the word bedtime story. It doesn't jolt you with dramatic battles or complex political intrigues. Instead, it unfolds at a languid, almost geological pace. It invites you into a world of hushed whispers, ancient prophecies, hidden sanctuaries, and the gentle, rhythmic breathing of an eternally dreaming king. The narrative itself mirrors the state it describes: calm, quiet, and deeply restful. It creates a vast, dimly lit imaginative space where your own mind can begin to wander, to soften its edges, and to prepare for its own journey into sleep. If you're looking for a story to get your adrenaline pumping and your mind racing, this legend, with its centuries of uninterrupted snoozing, probably isn't your first pick. Unless, of course, your idea of high excitement is, will he or won't he slightly shift his eternally slumbering left little finger after another couple of centuries? But for gently easing into the embrace of dreamland, it's pure, unadulterated gold, or perhaps more fittingly, pure, silent, shifting sand. The key elements of his legend, the enigmatic character of Mnemnasut himself, with his scholarly focus on dreams, the ancient and cryptic prophecy that foretold his fate, the meticulously hidden and magically guarded chamber, and the very idea of an enchanted sleep that preserves rather than destroys, all contribute to this atmosphere of profound tranquility and enduring mystery. It's a story that doesn't demand resolution. The fact that his slumber remains unbroken, his chamber undiscovered within the legend, at least to be and his ultimate purpose unknown, is part of its deep charm. It allows the mystery to breathe, to remain potent. The ancient Egyptians themselves had a sophisticated understanding of different modes of time and eternity, a mainstream historical fact that adds another layer to our contemplation. They conceived of jet time, a linear, static, and unending form of eternity, often associated with Osiris, the resurrected god of the afterlife, and the enduring cosmic existence of the deceased pharaoh who successfully made that journey. And then there was Nehe time, the cyclical, repeating, dynamic time of the living world, exemplified by the daily journey of the sun, god Ra across the sky, and the recurring seasons. Pharaoh Amenemnasut's unique, legendary slumber could almost be seen as a third kind of eternity, a state that is neither the active, cyclical renewal of Neha nor the established Osirian eternity of Jed, but something else entirely: a timeless pause, a dream outside of time, a quirky and rather evocative fringe tidbit that sometimes attaches itself to such legends of sacred. Hidden sleepers is the notion that the very air and environment around their resting place takes on a supernatural quality. It might be whispered in the oldest versions of Amenemnasut's tale that the atmosphere within a certain radius of his hidden chamber is exceptionally still, that sounds are naturally dampened, and that even the wild desert animals, with their keen primal instincts, instinctively avoid the immediate vicinity, sensing the profound, inviolable peace and the ancient power that resides there. This just adds to that lovely sense of a deeply protected, sacred quietude. Folklorists and literary critics, when they analyze the enduring appeal of myths and legends like that of our sleeping pharaoh, continue to debate the precise reasons for their remarkable longevity across cultures and centuries. Does their persistence stem more from the archetypal power of their core symbols, like the concept of eternal sleep, the figure of the hidden king, or the promise of a future reawakening? Is it their inherent adaptability, their ability to be subtly reshaped and reinterpreted to reflect the changing concerns and anxieties of each new generation that tells the tale? Or is it, perhaps, simply the fundamental human love for a good, mysterious, and ultimately unresolved story. One that leaves space for our own imagination to roam freely. And the best part, for our sleepy purposes, we still don't really know what Pharaoh Amenemnesit is dreaming about, if anything at all, in his sunless chamber. One likes to think he's not troubled by overdue tax returns from the Middle Kingdom, or anxieties about the price of lapis lazuli. Perhaps he's simply enjoying the ultimate, uninterrupted peace, a silence so profound it contains all sound. It's quite an aspirational state, really, when you think about the endless notifications and demands of our own waking lives. Goals, right? So, the pharaoh dreams on, a silent monarch in a silent kingdom of his own making. His legend a soft, sandy lullaby carried on the desert wind. And as his story gently fades from our immediate focus, it leaves behind not answers, but a feeling, a sense of peace, of mystery, and of the profound restorative power of truly deep, undisturbed rest. And now, as our own exploration of these ancient whispers and timeless slumbers comes to its final, quiet close, allow the figure of the sleeping pharaoh and the soft, sandy mystery of his hidden chamber to become a gentle and a fading image in your mind. The story has been told, the legend explored, and there are no more secrets to uncover tonight, no more prophecies to decipher, only the soft, enveloping stillness of this present moment, here in your own comfortable space. Let the echoes of ancient Egypt, the faint scent of lotus and myrrh, the imagined silence of that sunless chamber, all dissolve into the even deeper quiet that now surrounds you. The need to follow the narrative, to listen for the next detail, has passed. All that remains is the gentle invitation to let go, to allow your own thoughts to become as soft and drifting as desert sand settling at dusk. Feel the support of your bed beneath you, the gentle weight of your coverings, the easy rhythm of your own quiet breathing. There are no more demands on your attention, no more journeys to undertake, save for the one into your own peaceful, well-deserved sleep. Let the last vestiges of this ancient tale become a soft, comforting hum in the background of your mind, a gentle lullaby from a world long past, easing you towards the threshold of your own dreams. Surrender to the quiet, surrender to the comfort, and allow yourself to drift, easily and effortlessly, into the deep, restorative peace that awaits you now.